Alright guys, Sandbox 2.2.1 is now live, and we actually got details for all the different buffs that are hitting all of our Arc Subclasses this week. We will be individually testing these, but let's go over these patch notes. First up, we have the Titan class. Striker, Code of the Juggernaut, Frontal Assault, got a buff and duration increased from 10 to 16 seconds. The buff timer is now displayed on the HUD, and the buff now increases weapon damage 25% in PvE, 20% in PvP. Knockout, buff duration increased from 3 to 5 seconds. Buff is no longer disabled after a melee attack. In addition to breaking a shield, buff now triggers once you deal 60% damage to targets. Any damage dealt after 60% though does refresh that timer. Increased bonus melee damage from 25% to 60%. Gonna be pretty substantial when we start stacking that with something like Worm God Caress, 1-2 punch. A lot of different things here we can do here to buff our melee damage. Now they did say that there is a general bug fix an issue where Titans using Code of the Missile could perform the wrong melee. That was just a minor issue. Matter of fact, you could time it the moment your feet would touch the ground. If you meleeed then, it would do a shoulder charge instead of the missile melee attack or the ballistic slam. Really was no practical use for it. Moving on to the Hunter class, Arcstrider, Way of the Warrior, combination blow, bonus melee damage can now be stacked up to 3 times. Buff increased melee damage by 60% per stack in PvE. PvE players, that is very nasty. The buff increased melee damage by 22.7% per stack in PvP. This ability was previously 1 stack and increased melee damage by 50%. Kills with this ability now heal 40 health, in addition to starting health regeneration. Deadly Reach, increased buff duration from 6 to 8 seconds. The buff is no longer consumed by a melee hit. There's going to be some Synthocept level melees happening with this top tree Arcstrider. Moving on to Arcstrider, Way of the Wind. This is bottom tree, Disorienting Blow. Increase the melee disorient distance from 4 to 6 meters. Increase duration of disorient on players from 1.5 to 2 seconds. That is a ginormous amount of time in which we can't see or do anything. Very nasty melee. Focus Breathing, increased dodging recharge bonus while sprinting from 50% to 100%. Combat Meditation, increased bonus grenade and melee regeneration while bloodied. We also have Lightning Reflexes here that got an increase in damage resistance while dodging from 25% to 40% inside of PvP, and an increase in damage resistance while dodging from 63% to 70% inside of PvE. It's gonna be hell dealing with these Arcstriders this week. Moving on to Warlocks. General Arc changes Stormcaller super damage scales up to 150% over 5 seconds of continuous use of the attack. They also updated the FX and audio to support this functionality. Moving on though to the Attunement of Conduction. Top tree Stormcaller right here, guys. Chain Lightning Melee can now chain up to 5 times, up from 1, and each individual target can be hit twice. Chain damage decreased from 50 to 31 damage per hit. Arc Web increased chain range from 10 meters to 12 meters. Can now chain to many more targets and back and forth between targets. Guys, it looks really nasty. There was a clip last week that Bungie actually posted. It has some crazy chaining capabilities now. Chaining arc damage now reduces the cooldown of your grenade. So built-in synergy right there. This also works with Arc Web chains and chains from Chain Lightning melees. You can earn up to 3% energy per instance of damage in PvE, and you can earn up to 10% energy per instance of damage inside of PvP. Have your wrist runners ready, boys. Moving on to bottom tree Stormcaller, Attunement of the Elements. Electrostatic Surge increased bonus regeneration rate of Rift by 600% per nearby friendly guardian. Added a UI notification when the buff is active. Now extends Rift duration from 15 to 20 seconds. Simultaneously, we get an extension here of our Arc Souls from 8 to 12 seconds. Now some other things outside of our Arc classes that are also getting some reworks. Voidwalker Nova Warp, reduce initial charge detonation energy cost by 20%, reduce energy cost of holding the charge detonation by 7%, reduce time required to fully charge the charge detonation from 0.9 seconds to 0.7 seconds, reduce dart blink cost by 20%, and increase base super duration from 18 seconds to 22 seconds. Now notice nothing here is buffing Nova Warp's lethality, okay? I just want to point that out. I know some people think that Nova Warp is just returning to what it was before. Nothing here is increasing the damage. It's just purely increasing its duration as well as reducing costs of all of its super features. Moving on to Dawnblade Everlasting Fire. Tune the amount of super gain from Everlasting Fire. Initial return increased from 10% to 13%. The return now decays linearly over the course of 30 kills from 13% to 0.75% return per kill. They also fixed an issue where Warlock ability Bloom was not dealing any damage, improved consistency of handheld supernovas, and they fixed a bug which canceling Blade Barrage allowed players to traverse across the map. Now, weapons. We actually have some weapon changes here. Last word, added a timer to the Fanfire perk. Now, you could look at this as a nerf. We're gonna have to see how this behaves. If you look at last word, guys, intrinsically, it's got the exotic perk Fanfire, where it states that the weapons can be fired quickly and continuously. But the thing that they're talking about in adding a timer is that faster reload and increased accuracy on successive hipfire damage. Normally that resets the moment you reload, right? If you have a timer though, maybe that will transition into your next kill. We're gonna have to really check that one out, guys. The main thing to take away from that one is last word will not be able to hold Fanfire indefinitely. Say if you just got a couple shots off and you have Fanfire ×2, you can't just walk around with ×2 for forever, right? There'll be a timer there now. But the good thing is if you're chaining kills into enemies, Fanfire won't go away if you get 4 stacks. Hopefully if our duration here is long enough, you can just chain into another kill. I don't know, we'll just have to see how that one works out. Moving on to Warcliff Coil, reduce PvE damage by 25% against bosses and vehicles, all right? Warcliff Coil got a pretty substantial buff not too long ago. Now it's getting a nerf. We also have a bunch of just general weapon bug fixes. Nothing huge here in terms of like changing the weapons. Just more or less cosmetic stuff and some other random bug stuff and descriptions of certain weapon perks. Feel free to take a look at that if you like. We do have some armor bug fixes to go over though. Using Getaway Artist with Storm Grenades now correctly spawns a supercharged Arc Soul. I guess it wasn't before. Crown of Tempest once again works with Ball Lightning. And Stronghold will no longer drain heavy ammo while guarding with Black Talent. This is excellent, as that was the build we wanted to use all along. We'll be playing with that this week. Now, if you didn't know, guys, there has been a bunch of buffs to our loot happening this week. Feel free to see it all on the screen right here. Everything is getting a substantial buff in terms of like raid items such as 1000 Voices, the Wishmaker Shell, Starlight Shell inside of Dreaming City, lore books, Dreaming City lore, Tangle Shore lore. So if you're missing out on any of that loot, this week is a good week to go after it and going forward. This is not just for this week. Now moving on to the big stuff, 4 new exotic weapon catalysts are now available to drop in Nightfall Strikes and the Crucible, Prospector, Rat King, Hardlight, and Suros Regime. Now notice here it says Prospector, Nightfall Strikes, Rat King, Nightfall Strikes, and Hardlight, Nightfall, and Strikes. Suros being the only one from Crucible that it mentions here. I'll probably be looking into a way to possibly farm these catalysts if they're as rare as we have seen before in the past with other exotic catalysts. I mean, it's only taken me approximately 8 months to get the Wrist Runner catalysts. I would say these are going to be pretty rare. Now, last note here is that Xur's inventory now offers random roll perks for armor. That is for our exotic armor, which is a really big deal for those that are chasing God roll exotic armor. Now, starting from this week going forward, 8-1 will now offer all 7 weapon frames each week. Now, players can only complete only 2 powerful frames per week, at which point remaining frames are removed until the next weekly reset, so choose wisely. Now, last thing right here, which is actually pretty cool, Arsenic Bite now drops with random rolls. That is a bow found in our energy slot that has had nothing but static rolls now since Forsaken launch. It is a good bow, but it would have been much better with the right roll. We'll be individually reviewing that one this week. Now moving on to Reckoning. For those that are actually trying to go after Gambit Prime weapons, Reckoning Tier 2 and Tier 3 bosses now always have a chance to award a Gambit Prime weapon. The chances for weapon rewards increase each time a boss is killed without a weapon drop. This is excellent, as I am on the hunt for some God roll Gambit Prime weapons, and they are elusive. Now moving on to Gambit Prime though, some Reckoning weapons now have a chance to drop as match completion rewards from Gambit Prime. Chances increase after each Gambit Prime match without a weapon drop. So again, all around the board between both Gambit and Reckoning, we should start seeing an increase in weapon drops. Now some changes here inside of Gambit Prime though. An invasion kill now heals 8% of Primeval's health, which is now down from 12%. The invasion portal cooldown time during Primeval phase has been increased to 40 seconds, up from 30. That doesn't sound like a lot, but that is a pretty large jump there. which can result in you actually probably getting through your DPS phase before someone starts invading again, as that cooldown there will only trigger after a player has been killed or successfully returns from an invasion. Now moving on to Gambit itself, high value targets now have a chance to spawn during the first round of a Gambit match. The chance for a high value target to spawn in the second round has been increased. Now nightfalls. Nightfall tickets now have a minimum max and a plus and minus 25 for incrementing power reduction. This will allow players to get to the plus 100 power reduction easier to increase the score multiplier. This should save you a little bit of time before going into that nightfall. Moving on to Crucible competitive, fixed an issue where players who are disconnected from Destiny servers could not rejoin games in the competitive Crucible playlist. My experience has been that most players who have disconnected intentionally did so, but we'll see. Moving on to Iron Banner, the curated role, Wizened Rebuke, Fusion Rifle awarded for completing the Atlas Unbound Triumph, will now appear in Lord Saladin's inventory so that players can inspect it prior to acquisition. Once earned, the weapon may be viewed in collections. I don't think this is going to incite motivation for this weapon. Still ass. So guys, that is pretty much patch 2.2.1. We've got a lot to cover, so I hope you're ready. Fellas and ladies, thank you all for coming and watching, and as always,
slap that like button like your mama told you right.